Thank you very much. So first of all, my apologies for I have no Spanish language skills whatsoever. So I'll always talk in English. I'll try to stick within the 40 minutes, but I might get carried away, so you have to give me signs on when it's 10 minutes left and 5 minutes left. So this talk today, I'm going to talk about opposition movements, so large scale, mainly mass mobilization, mass opposition movements, people protesting in the streets, and how that affects regime change. And in particular, we're going to look at one type of regime change, and that's related to democratization. So there are several ways in which political regimes can change. For example, you might have one military regime replacing another military regime, so you have a regime change from one autocracy to another autocracy, from one dictatorship to another dictatorship. But some of the regime changes that we have been, as political scientists, have been most interested in relates to democratization. So going from a less democratic to a more democratic regime. And since it is.
There you go.
It came back.
We have to go through there all the time.
Huh? So just he comes back.
Yes. So this is one measure of democracy. So the V-Dem project was mentioned in the introduction. So together with David Altman, who I guess is with us on via Facebook, and many other researchers across the world, we are collecting these varieties of democracy data, V-Dem data, on different notions of different concepts of democracy. And this is one. So this is the global average of democracy, electoral democracy, according to V-Dem, the so-called polyarchy index. And here you can see, going back to the French Revolution of 1789, a very long, gradual increase throughout the 19th century, a spike after World War I, and then you have these waves of democratization and a reverse democratization. So this is just one measure of electoral democracy. This is the one I'll be using in the study I'm going to discuss later on. So it builds on, for example, are there contested elections? Are there free and fair elections? Is there freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of association? So can you form opposition parties freely? And is there suffrage? So is everyone allowed to vote in elections? So it's very focused, this definition is very focused on elections. So here is just, since I have these 30-40 minutes, I won't spend too much time on the very cool V-Dem data, but this is just another way of illustrating how. So the blue ones are the average democratization in a year for those countries that are democratizing in any given year. So you can see here are the 1848 revolutions, both in Europe and in Latin America. You had several revolutions leading to democratization, and then you had counter-revolutions leading to more autocratic regimes in 1849. This is right after World War II, a lot of democratization in several countries. But at the same time, you also have regimes going in the opposite direction, going from more democratic to more autocratic countries. So these are the red ones. And as you can see now, very recently, even more countries going in the wrong direction. Okay, so this is democratization. These are general trends in moving from more dictatorial to more democratic regimes. But there are several different processes that can be behind such democratizing changes. So for example, there's a big debate in the political science literature on whether or not we should think of basically elites or the people, the broader masses, as being the key agents of democratization. So a lot of the political science literature has focused on different elites competing against each other. You have urban elites, rural elites, and then they come to some kind of agreement that it's better for us to compete in elections, contesting in a democratic system, rather than fight each other with guns. Right? So there are several kind of elite explanations of democracy in the literature. But others point to, well, these elites, they rather want to control the political system. So you have to look at the pressure from the masses, the people who mobilize perhaps in the street and pressure elites to concede democratic rights, suffrage to all. What I'm going to argue actually is the last possibility, namely there is some kind of interaction here. We have to understand both how the masses pressure for rights and how elites respond. Is often, if you need a full story of democratization, it often happens with both the masses mobilizing in the streets and with elites negotiating in smoke-filled rooms and say local constitutions, etc. Yeah, so even though in my talk I'm mostly going to focus on mobilized opposition, so large-scale opposition movement, protest by people, I think a large part of the story is often how these protests in the street, they do not automatically just yield democratization, but they yield democratization by pressuring the elites to consider providing democratic rights instead of having their heads chopped off in a revolution, basically. Yeah. Ah, cool. Yep. So this is, just take one step back. So the paper that was mentioned that I'm going to focus the most on is, as noted, this short GOP article on mass opposition campaigns and democratization, written together with Sirianne Dalum at PRIO and Torvik at the University of Oslo. But I'm also going to present some data from a recent paper with Vilde Juve and also Torvik, who is joining on both of these papers, on different types of regime change processes. I'm going to sneak in a bit, combine a bit from both papers. And this second paper on regime change processes, here we basically go through, it's a large project, kind of involved in, it's nested within the V-Dem project, where we go through the political history of 202 countries and try to count different types of regime change. So here we're counting not only democratization episode, but also, for example, changes from one military regime to another, changes from one monarchy to a military regime. So different kinds of regime changes. And then we're counting exactly the way in which these regimes broke down. And as you can see, regimes can break down in multiple ways. So popular uprising and classical revolutions is not the most frequent one. Very, very often we have called it as guided liberalization. This is basically the regime elites, the ones that are in power already, saying, okay, for some reason, we want to negotiate a transition to a more democratic system. Maybe it's because we fear losing our heads in the revolution. Maybe it's because the good of our heart, what we know, and several different ways this could happen. Or it could be through military coups, other types of transformations. It could be foreign interventions. So there are multiple ways in which regimes die. I think the reason why I want to highlight this is that the classical popular uprising, the French Revolution of 1789, 1848, Romania, for example, the fall of Ceausescu, that's what we think of when we think of masses mobilizing in the street and regime change. That's just a small part of the story. Very often, regime change happens after mass mobilization simply because the elites are afraid, get together and negotiate a regime change to something different, often to avoid a revolutionary regime. So we have to think broadly about different types of processes. All right, a lot of colorful lines. I'm very happy we didn't have the screen with all the noise because then it would have been hard to see. I just wanted to show you this because pretty much as democratization has come in waves and disappeared in reverse waves, also when you look at these particular ways that regimes end, the ways they die, they've also cycled throughout history. So if you look at the green line, that's military coups and coups by other elite actors. Those are coup d'etats. With a large peak around 1850, then it kind of died out towards 1900. And then, and this is especially, of course, in your region, but also in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, in the 1960s, 70s, we had a lot of coup d'etats. And now there's talk about, well, coups are kind of an historical artifact. it's a very old traditional ways of regimes dying. It's not relevant anymore. So it's very infrequent, but what we see from this bigger historical pattern is that we might expect these regime change types to appear in cycles. So who knows, in 2 decades, maybe coup d'etats will, will come back. Right? The same thing with these popular uprisings, so the standard revolutions, the red lines. So you can see here a massive spike around, or massive, it's maybe not that massive, but it's still a spike around 1848. Then a lot of uprisings, early 20th century. Then it kind of dies down, and here it's on its way back up. So these data ended in 2016. And as you know, last year, 2019, was a year of major protests in several different regions across the world. So here I just stole a picture from France 24. They've actually managed to place Sudan wrongly on the map. So this is not me, Sudan should be here. So this was just one example. If you, when you read these kind of end of the year statements of 2019, which kind of year was it? A lot of the stuff that I was reading was the year of popular uprisings, the year of the people rising up in the streets. Of course, as you are very well aware, Chile is also marked here. So the yellow ones are quoted by France 24 as widespread unrest, and the red ones are where the leaders were also forced out of power as a result of this unrest. So from Europe to East Asia to South America to Africa. And this is just to, the point of just having this slide here relates to this, this wave point. So one reason why these regime change processes come and go in waves. So there are several reasons why they come and go in waves, but one reason is the inspiration, basically the inspiration and learning effects across borders. So people in Algeria might observe what is happening in Santiago or in Hong Kong. They may be inspired, they may learn new techniques. There are even groups of people traveling around organizing protests, right? So there's a lot of cross-border learning. The leaders and elites, they learn from each other how to handle protests, how to make concessions or crack down with repression. And all of these kinds of spillover effects, which used to be very regionally contained, now seem to be part of a bigger global landscape. That would be my speculation. So this is 2019, a lot of protests. We go back almost 200 years, 1848, the year of the revolution. So this is just copy-pasted from a figure in the V-Dem article. So these are basically the regime changes in Europe in 1848. Fewer countries back then. This is just Europe. It just shows you a lot of regime changes. The length of the bars are basically how long the regimes have existed. So the Hungarian one was pretty old. So we had France. Protests spread not by television or social media, but by horseback. So people would ride by horseback to Vienna, to Budapest, to Copenhagen, tell about the revolutionary events, and revolutions would spring up. Right. So this is kind of the background for the talk today. Exactly how these mass protests, uprisings, revolutions tend to spread and cluster. So I'm going to be a bit more specific. I'm going to talk about mobilized opposition campaigns. So there are a lot of different names on this these kinds of processes, these kinds of I don't know what even to call the animal. If it's an event or it's a large scale organized mobilization, should be a relatively large number of people. They should mobilize not on a single day, but for some sustained period of time. And they should have some kind of specified goal. Its leaders should specify at least one goal for change directed towards the political authorities. And very often those goals are related to a liberalization of the regime. So you demand democratization, either if you're in a in an autocracy where you have very limited rights, maybe you don't even have elections, and people will demand democratic rights. Or you could be in a defective democracy, a democracy with room for improvement, so to speak. So there could be elections, there could even be universal suffrage, but there might be deficiencies in political representation that trigger people to demand increased representation, increased democracy. So this is a very common goal for many of these observed opposition campaigns throughout the world for the last century or so. So I'm going to make a super small, super short detour to tomorrow's talk. So I'm going to talk mainly about democratization today. How do these opposition movements demand and enforce democratization? But sometimes reducing inequalities, ensuring social welfare policies are the goals of opposition movements. Right, so it's not, and I'm not going to go into, I have no knowledge of Chilean politics, I won't dare say anything about Chile during this talk, but I guess you can relate to that point about reducing inequalities and pursuing different kinds of economic policies. So in my talk tomorrow, I'm going to talk about this guy, Lenin. He looks extremely scary. He's going to take the capital of the business owner and then the middle class. So I'm going to talk about how, in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution and with the formation of the Communist International, Comintern, how the revolutionary threat, especially in many Western European countries, but also in countries across the world, was enhanced by these international events. So the fact that you had a revolutionary regime in Russia that was willing to support revolutionary actors in many of the countries really boosted the perception by elites of a threat of revolution. And in my talk tomorrow, I'm going to focus on especially the Norwegian case, how the elites try to accommodate this revolutionary threat by basically giving a lot of concessions. So introducing the 8-hour workday, which had long been a demand by industrial workers, working for other progressive redistributional schemes in order to kind of take away some of this radical support for radical revolution and try to get industrial labor back into the reformist camp. So sometimes opposition is about policy goals, but we're here going to leave Lenin be and talk about democratization. So what does existing research say about the role of popular mobilization, opposition campaigns, in giving democratization? And even more specifically, we know that some opposition campaigns can go on for years and years without giving any democratization, without ensuring any change in the political regime, whereas other campaigns are very effective. So in the paper I'm going to talk about, in our study, we're looking at how different opposition campaigns differ in terms of how effective they are bringing about democratization. So the existing research on this, and this is if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend the book by Erika Chenoweth and Maria Stefan on why civil resistance works. So it's a book from 2011, and it's looking in particular at the tactics chosen by different opposition campaigns. So this is basically looking at these large-scale opposition movements that we are also looking at in our paper, but then saying in particular that the choice of violent versus non-violent tactics is really important. So the main claim in this book is that non-violence is super effective in bringing about democratization. Once you go violent, you kind of turn away a lot of the people who would have been sympathetic to your cause. They say, well, we don't want to join in this violent uprising, so we will rather stay at home. And then the government can quash the violent opposition. If you go non-violent, bring out your pots and pans, and you have large masses mobilizing in the capital, hundreds and thousands of people. That's something that's related to non-violent protests, which brings in a lot of sympathizers. You create these large-scale movements that are very hard for regimes to deal with. You can't go about shooting 1 million people, or you can. Oftentimes, it's a leaving morals aside. It's also a very difficult strategic decision So they're looking at tactics. So going back to this general question, so asking again, why do some of these movements lead to democratization and not others? We're not going to focus in particular on tactics with the paper that I'm going to talk about, but more specifically the social background of protesters. So our argument is that it really matters for the effectiveness of social mobilization who the protesters are. So who revolts is going to matter for whether or not democratization is a likely outcome. And just to give you the short version, what we really find here is that when industrial workers, and to some extent also the urban middle classes, are the ones dominating protest movements, then democratization is much more likely to happen than, for example, if peasants are the ones dominating these movements. So especially the urban industrial workers, and to some extent the urban middle classes, when they mobilize, democratization is likely to happen. So the background is that it's a bit hard to see. You can imagine these are students, I guess. Some workers, peasants, other types of groups can mobilize large-scale opposition towards the regime, and we're looking into how these differences in social composition matters. So I'm not going to spend, so of course it's, whenever you have an academic presentation, you should name drop the classics in the field. So this is just to show you that this is not a new thing that we have suddenly discovered. There's been a lot of discussions on, for example, the democratizing role of workers versus the urban middle classes, the poor demanding revolution as being agents of democratization, versus rich elites rather saying that, well, democracy is kind of okay because then we can ensure property rights and so that other elites don't expropriate us. So this has been an ongoing discussion which groups are more or less agents of democratization, and we're building on that. And in kind of the main argument that we are pursuing is that in order for a group, when it mobilizes opposition, to be effective in achieving democratization, you need to have you need to have preferences for having a democratic outcome be the result of your movement. So some, let's say, military officers might mobilize against the regime, perhaps violently, but they may want something other than democracy as a result. If they're able to force out the existing regime, they might rather want a military dictatorship. So you need to have the preferences for democracy, or at least not strong anti-democratic preferences. So, but preferences is one thing. So I can desire democracy as much as I want. If I don't have any power resources to put behind my demands, it doesn't really matter. So in addition to preferences, you need to have some kind of capacity to organize large-scale collective action, and also have economic and other power resources that you can use to pressure the existing regime. So if I'm the major union leader of a large-scale industrial union, I can say, well, if we don't get concessions, for example, in terms of voting rights, we will go enter a massive strike, which means that there will be no industrial production, there will be no tax incomes for the regime, and they will feel under pressure. So you need to have some kind of leverage and capacity. And our very, very simple argument is that if you look at the combination of democratic preferences and capacities to enact change, urban middle classes, but especially industrial workers, are kind of fitting this description. So especially when it comes to industrial workers, you often have, I think that unions play a large role in being able to direct the energies of these different workers. So you already have an organizational vehicle in place. Also, when it comes to preferences, of course, a lot of the literature on South American politics, historically from the 60s and 70s and 80s, even point to the very ambivalent role of the middle classes in several contexts. So in certain contexts, the middle classes might have incentives to ally with let's say landowning elites, and rather support a more bureaucratic authoritarian regime. So there's more debate on exactly where the middle classes tend to land. Right. So how am I doing? 10? Yeah. So that's the theoretical arguments. What we do in practice is that we go back to, so there's this marvelous, I wouldn't say beautiful data set, but I cannot use the word beautiful because Donald Trump has destroyed the meaning. He claims that everything is beautiful. So they have this fantastic data set where they code large-scale opposition groups, more than 200 large-scale opposition campaigns. They call their size and whether they're violent or non-violent. So what we basically did for this research was to go into different historical sources, different lists, different secondary historical sources to consider the social composition of these campaigns. So we used the already existing campaigns from the Chenlet and Stepan dataset, and we looked into them and said, okay, which groups, so where did this movement originate? So did it originate among, let's say, peasants or military officers or industrial workers? Which groups are participating in a sufficient manner to be mentioned in the sources? So if the sources say that, well, there were some students, there were some labor unions, there were some peasants, well, then we code all of these groups as participating. And then what we are indeed using mostly for empirical work, domination. So are the sources clear on one group being the dominant one, either leading the group or being in clear majority of this opposition campaign? And we then try to code the origin, participation, domination variables for industrial workers, urban middle classes, and this includes students. We count them as part of the middle classes. We do some tests for that because students are a very particular group that is often envisaged to be have a very democratizing role. Peasants, military employees, then we count public sector employees as different from the urban middle classes, even though we could say that these are perhaps two things of two similar groups. We argue that public sector employees often have a very particular connection to the state and to the regime. So we basically anticipated that they would be often more anti-democratic than the other urban middle classes. And then we code also, we have done coding if there's a mentioning of particular religious or ethnic groups being dominant. So these are cross-cutting these categorizations. Yeah. So just by I took out one took out a figure that I could have showed you. That basic plot would show that if we just look at raw numbers, we take every country that experienced an opposition campaign, and we look at the democratic situation before the campaign started, the situation right after the campaign ended, or even 5 years after the campaign ended. We would see that those campaigns that were dominated by the urban middle classes or industrial workers are generally much more likely to bring about increased democratization. Whereas, for example, campaigns dominated by peasants very often end with less democratic regimes after the campaign is ended. So remember here that one outcome of mobilizing opposition is that the regime basically represses the opposition, wins out, and introduces more draconian measures. So you quash the opposition and you take away civil liberties and voting rights, for example, and then introduce a new and more autocratic regime. So that's something that's happened after several peasant groups. Of course, the fact that there's a correlation here doesn't necessarily mean that there is something about these industrial worker campaigns that brings about democratization in a causal manner. So in our paper we make several hundreds of boring tests. There's a long appendix, very long appendix, on where we try to control for different eventualities. So I promised David, who is with us now, to not go full nerd in this talk and show you a lot of regression equations and these types of things. So I'm just going to mention that we are running statistical analysis, where we are basically wanting to see our independent variable or explanatory variable would be the social composition of these opposition campaigns. We want to look at changes in this polyarchy electoral democracy measure that I showed you earlier on from V-Dem, changes in democracy. And then we're trying to control for different things. So we're trying to say, okay, let's hold income level constant. Because it might just be that urban middle classes, they tend to be more dominant in wealthy societies. And wealthy societies, for some other reason, tend to democratize. So we want to control for the income level. Control for the population level, initial democracy, etc. So we make a lot of controls. And then we conduct different tests. First, where we compare across these opposition campaigns. So we take the 200 campaigns, and we see, okay, what happened, what was the situation before the campaign? Where did it end up 2 or 5 or 10 years after in terms of democracy level? And we compare across these campaigns dominated by different groups. And then we run what we call panel regression, which is basically time series. We have long time series for every country, and we include also countries where we have no opposition campaign mobilization. For example, it might be relevant to see, okay, let's compare a situation where we have an opposition movement dominated by the industrial workers to a situation where you have no opposition movement at all. So do we still see that there is increased democratization? So first, we run some very simple tests where we just combine industrial workers and urban middle classes. Let's call them urban groups. And this is just a regression coefficient plot, so I'm going half nerd in this talk. So basically what you need to think about is this red line here representing no, basically. So the fact that GDP per capita here is very close to the red line means that increasing GDP per capita by 1 unit, say $1,000 does not really change the probability of our democratization score by much when we hold all these other things fixed. Urbanization, so in more urbanized societies we tend to have more democratization. But what we do find is that these campaigns that are dominated by urban groups, even when we hold constant income, population level, urbanization, they tend to lead to more democracy. And this goes, so the comparison here is, we're comparing these urban campaigns to situations without any opposition campaigns at all. But as you can see, these are all the other campaigns. So basically what this is saying is that there's observed no difference in the data in terms of effect on democratization when we compare, say, peasant-dominated campaigns or military officer-dominated campaigns with situations with no campaigns. So those tend to end in about, but the more democratizing situation comes after these urban-dominated campaigns. And then we spend most of the empirical analysis trying to separate the urban middle classes and industrial workers to see, okay, let's compare, let's see if these particular groups are more, have a stronger effect on democratization after the campaigns. Basically here it seems that both the middle class dominated campaigns and the industrial worker dominated campaigns, you can see that these are the confidence intervals. So with a fairly high degree of certainty, we can say that both of these campaigns tend to increase democratization level. So they're both removed from this red line. So this is our like main model. What then happens is when we run several different types of tests where we're taking into account different control variables, for example, controlling for the size of the campaign, trying to take into account, for example, when we change the definition of a middle class so that we include these public sector employees, things change with our results. So what we then tend to find is that this middle class result is a bit sensitive to exactly how we specify the statistical model. So we can't say with full certainty that these middle class dominated campaigns are more democratizing than other campaigns or situations with no campaigns. So there's substantial evidence indicating it, but if you want to be a very, very careful person and not claim too much, you still have to say there's some uncertainty. Whereas when industrial workers dominate protest movements, opposition campaigns, then the statistical model specification doesn't really matter all that much. We tend to find that these are democratizing campaigns nonetheless. So it's a very robust result. So you can take this to the bank and wager your house on it. Or maybe wouldn't do that, but almost. So this is just the final slide. So the main findings from this work is that when looking across all countries globally, and the time span was 1900 to 2012 or 2008. I forgot to mention that it was on the slides, but I forgot to say it. So it's a global analysis. We tend to see that whenever we have opposition campaigns dominated by urban groups, and in particular industrial workers, we tend to see more democratization. So in terms of implications, I'm not going to spend more 10 minutes since I'm sure I'm over time. But I think it speaks to several of these long-standing debates on the importance of urbanization, the importance of particular social groups, and especially the comparison between the urban middle classes and industrial workers. There's a long-standing debate on who are the agents of democratization. And if anything, we tend to find especially strong indications that whenever industrial workers mobilize, they are key agents of democratization. The other point I think is worth taking home from this work is that, for example, with the V-Dem project, but also political science in general, has been very focused on institutions. So we've been focused on elections, parties, civil constitutions, various institutional features. And that's super important for understanding regime change. It's super important for understanding the stability of different types of regimes. But I think especially a lot of the statistical analysis, even though you have qualitative analysis and theoretical work focusing more on actors who are revolting, who are supporting the regime, a lot of the stats people, such as myself, who do like large and regression analysis, we kind of overlooked actors. So we looked more at institutions because they're easier to measure, easier to include in regressions. I hope that our study and the work we will continue to do so that it is possible also in such studies to study more specifically how actors matter for politics.